In no other case have I seen where you see this much DNA of someone else, and we're not looking for someone else.
Right.
When they ended up testing the nylon rope that was around her neck,
I don't know if they ever did. I don't know that.
they tested the rope,
Okay.
but not the wooden handle itself.
Mm.
And the rope came back with an unknown sample,
I didn't know that.
but it.
The sailboat.
Were you in the Navy?
Yeah. That doesn't matter.
Okay.
It's irrelevant.
Sure.
I think it was a sail. I don't know.
You may have heard someone say, whoever wrote the ransom note killed JONBENET. In the same way, we could also say, whoever tied the knots killed JONBENET.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. The knot tying is much closer to the crime, far more directly associated with the victim than the note. The knots are, do you agree, part of the ground zero of the crime scene evidence. Think about it. A particular type of knot was actually part of the lethal instrument that killed JONBENET, what some might refer to as the murder weapon. In the previous analysis dealing with Burke's two knives, there's a reference to a multi-tool knife and a tool used specifically for knots. It's important to note that of all the tools on the knife, Burke Ramsey specifically refers to the one associated with knots. Now, we all know what a Swiss Army knife looks like, that the classic multi-tool that a lot of little boys grow up with. But what about the smaller knife? Well, the smaller knife Burke seems to be referring to was perhaps something like this. It's important to emphasize here that the knife with the knot tool was, and likely still is, part of the official paraphernalia for Boy Scouts in the USA. These were manufactured until the late 1990s, so Christmas 1996 is right in that ballpark. So if this piece of wood with string and a peculiar kind of knot on it is the murder weapon, what does it tell us about the murderer? Well, think about it like this. The ransom note, not just the handwriting, but the content, tells us who the author is, tells us about the author and the type of person he or she is. Doesn't the knot do the same? Doesn't the knot also tell us it's more likely a male or a female? Not just the fact of the knot itself, but the knot in context, the content, the substance, the type of language, as it were, of the knot. And did you know that there were 3 different knots found on pieces of nylon attached to JONBENET? If you did, can you name them? Now, in the same way that the ransom note contains idiosyncratic words and phrases such as and hence, attaché, and fat cats, which suggests a writer who might have been a journalism major once upon a time, say like Bill McReynolds or Patsy Ramsey. In the same way, we can use the idiosyncrasies of the knots which reveal a lot about the knot maker. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Welcome to the many of you who have subscribed recently. By the way, if my voice sounds a little strange, I am struggling a little with a sore throat, so please do bear with me. I'll also likely be keeping the videos a little shorter than I would like to, because of just to sort of spare my voice. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Now, as you're about to see, I'm about to use the ransom note as a kind of allegory for the knot and the knot maker. So in the same way, through the writing, through the content, you determine the writer. We want to use the same form of extrapolation with the knot. But let's first immerse ourselves a little bit more in the ransom note before we do that. Do you mind if I do a quick statement analysis on the 3 words I mentioned? And hence, attaché, and fat cats. Let's start with number 1, and hence. And hence is a phrase Patsy used in her Christmas newsletters, such as this reference in her 1997 newsletter. Also, Judith Phillips, a family friend and photographer of the Ramsey family, this is going back 10 years, so someone who was really familiar with the Ramseys and Patsy in particular, she said that and hence leapt out at her. This was at least one reason Judith believed Patsy to be the author of the ransom note. Number 2, attaché. We also know from Patsy's 1997 police interview that one particular literary work made such an impression on Patsy in high school that she used it in a sketch that won her Miss West Virginia, and she intended to use it again for the Miss America pageant. It was a dramatic scene from Scottish author Muriel Sparks' The Prime of Miss Jane Brodie. Here are a handful of excerpts from Sparks' 1961 book. Something about swung the attaché case which held her books. Attaché with the accented E is almost as unusual as JONBENET. There's an accented E in that name. How many people do you know with an accented E in their names? What sort of writer would think about this? Then have a look at this, also from the Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. Creme de la creme, accented E's abound. Now have a look above the encircled text to multiple references to pineapple and cream. Number 3, fat cats. The ransom note refers to talking to stray dogs and a reference to a fat cat. Well, we know the Ramseys had a dog that often stayed at the neighbors. Karen Howard, an Access Graphics employee, remembered Patsy's father Don, who also worked at John Ramsey's company, using the term cats all the time. And this is from Perfect Murder, Perfect Town. Karen Howard remembered that Patsy's father Don used the word cats all the time. For example, those cats down in marketing. So you can see some of the source code for the Ramsey ransom note may have come from the Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. It isn't without basis, and this is not typical guy reading stuff if you ask me. There's also this. I can't remember how you spell possession. Are there 2 S's or ... And very early in the ransom note it says, we have your daughter in our possession, spelt with 1 S. And so just as there are clues to the authorship of the ransom note writer through some selective idiosyncrasies, the knots suggest a certain kind of person as well. If the knots narrative take us into the territory of Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts, make no mistake, it's also the territory of sailing. And you'll notice whenever John is asked about sailing, he tends to minimize it, as he did in an interview with Crime Junkie just a couple of weeks ago. And here we are 28 years later, and the Ramsey case still has many people tied up in knots. Who did it? Who did what? How? Why? Between the mostly clueless media reports surrounding the new Netflix docuseries and the comments I get on my own channel, what I mostly see is an inability to find the right perspective on the details. And even when we do get that right, we tend to lose the larger perspective, the bigger picture, the outline, the silhouette overshadowing this case. And so what we need to do is have the appropriate details perspective reconciled with the appropriate bigger picture perspective. And that seems to be not very easy to do for most people either investigating or analyzing this case. So what we need to do here is balance details with an overarching outline. What do I mean? Well, let's go back to the ransom note as allegory for the knot narrative. We can pull out a magnifying glass and inspect letter shapes, but if we don't approach this process with insight that we are dealing with disguised handwriting, then you can be the best, most skilled graphologist in the world and it's not really going to get you anywhere. You know, the idea of using simple handwriting analysis to match against samples is naive at best if the handwriting is disguised to begin with. What we need to do then is a combination of technical analysis, which focuses on details, and there are some details which do correspond, but also psychological analysis, which reconciles the details and the whole to a congruent overall picture. Are you following me? Now, handwriting aside, I find it interesting how Patsy's identity seems to broadly correlate her to the ransom note, her love of language and writing, her fondness for particular expressions, her use of grammar and syntax. Patsy's also a very over-the-top personality, and you can see that through her excessive use of exclamation marks. Is there an excessive use of exclamation marks in the ransom note? Well, doesn't it start with an exclamation mark? Listen carefully. Now, I know what you're thinking, and you're right. A lot of this likely isn't admissible in a court of law. I mean, it's all subjective. But can't some kind of argument be made for a psychological match here? Look at how all of this is mixed in, including apparently a movie addict who knew certain contemporary movie quotes off by heart. And what do pageant queens do? Well, they also learn lines off by heart. And we know Burke's train room had around 6 movie posters in the basement. We also know Dirty Harry aired on TBS in Boulder less than a month before the incident. Going back to Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, on November 29, a month before JonBenet's death, the movie Dirty Harry had aired on TBS in Boulder. In the movie, a kidnapper tells Clint Eastwood, if you talk to anyone, I don't care if it's a Pekingese pissing against a lamppost, the girl dies. While JonBenet's ransom note threatened, if we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies. In Dirty Harry, the kidnapper says, it sounds like you had a good rest, you'll need it. JonBenet's ransom note said, the delivery will be exhausting, so I advise you to be rested. Now, besides all this, we know the Ramseys had a ferocious appetite for reading, and people who read a lot tend to be writers of a sort. And the Ramseys did go on to write and publish a best-selling book. John Ramsey, up until the present, has written multiple books. Think about that statement with regard to Amanda Knox. She was also very into reading, especially Harry Potter, and she went on to become a writer as well. I did too. Now, you may have heard someone say, whoever wrote the ransom note killed JonBenet. In the same way, couldn't one say, whoever tied the knots killed JonBenet? Now, by the way, I don't think that's correct. On this, my opinion would be, whoever wrote the note was an accessory to whoever killed JonBenet. But what about John's identity? What about Burke's identity? We've dealt with Patsy's identity and that relationship, that psychology, potentially with a ransom note. Now, what about John's identity, Burke's identity, vis-a-vis the intruder of the month's identity related to the psychology of the knots? Have you ever thought about that? Well, did you know that John Ramsey was in the Navy? And do you know what his speciality was? Well, I'm not going to take it further than that for now. I've got to save my throat. If you're interested in my digging deeper into the knot narrative, please let me know in the comments. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.